Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for taking your time out to join in what is hopefully going to be a great morning of insight and debate into the UK National Annex. We've got a lot planned on for you this morning, actually, and it's going to take a little bit of organisation. So we'll go through it quite clearly as the day goes on, tell you exactly what's coming next, what we expect from you and what you need to do. There's going to be a bit of switching between different meeting rooms. So today, what we're looking at, we're looking at the UK National Annex. The new version is currently being drafted. Hopefully some of you have seen that already. If you haven't, what we're talking about today is the National Annex, not ISO 19650 itself. So we're specifically looking at the 4 or 5 pages at the end, which are specific to the UK and the standard naming conventions, status codes, revisions that we're looking at. What we're hoping to do today is to get a completely open and honest debate on what you think is good about the National Annex, particularly things that need to be improved. We've got a couple of presentations that are going to talk about how the standards have been implemented and some challenges that have come up. If there's anything missing, we'd like to hear about that as well. Things that you think should be included in the National Annex that you use on many projects. Now, it's not specifically about the new version, the updates, but we are going to have a presentation on what those are, and we will be taking you through the new draft in the breakout sessions later on. But before we go on, just a quick word about how the mainstream is going to work. You may have used GoToWebinar before. Hopefully you've been on some of the UK BIM Alliance presentations before. But what we'd like you to do is you'll be in listen-only mode as the presentations go on. If you've got questions, you will see a panel to the right-hand side. If you haven't got it open, there'll be a drop down there that allows you to post questions. You can either do it to everyone or you can send it privately to the organisers. We'll pick those up. And then what we'll do is at the end of the 2 presentations, if there are any burning questions about those 2 presentations, we'll cover those then. They will be about the presentations though. If it's questions about the National Annex, we'll hold those and use those in the breakout debate sessions later. So please avoid using the raise hand button. Always try and post a question instead. This morning's being recorded, so if you miss parts, you can get back onto the UK BIM Alliance YouTube channel later, and the whole thing will be available to re-listen there. Today's agenda, we're just coming to the end of the welcome, which is by me. We're then going to have 2 presentations, as I said. John Ford wrote an excellent article recently on the changes to the National Annex in the new draft. He's going to be covering those and giving us his thoughts on what has changed and why things have changed. Ronald Lammerts van Buren, Chair of BIM for Design, is then going to be giving us an overview of the BIM for Design review of the National Annex and the challenges they've had in implementing it across design practices. We're then coming back to me. I'll give you an update then of what happens with the breakout sessions. I won't go into that in detail now. We'll look at that later. At the end of the breakout sessions, when you've all had the chance to have your debate, there will be a short break while the hosts get all their notes together and come back in then to this go-to meeting at 12:15, where we'll get feedback and summary from each of the different groups so that we can all see whether we're all having the same challenges, regardless of whether we're designers, contractors, clients, FM. We just want to get a feedback then about what we're seeing across the industry. I'll give a summary of those and where this goes next. So without any further ado, let's get on with our presenters this morning. First one up, John Ford from Galliford Try. John is a specialist in digital information modelling. He's got over 15 years experience. He was lucky in the early part of his career to be involved in the Avanti work that eventually went on to be a BS 1192 and then contributed to PAS 1192 Part 2. So he's got a lot of experience in this. And John is also a member of the B555 committee. He has written parts of the guidance documents, which hopefully all of you have picked up, and also co-authored a book on COBie for construction. So, John, over to you and your vast experience on this kind of thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Morning all, can you hear me okay? Just to confirm, Nigel.
Yep, hear you perfectly.
Excellent. So yes, Nigel's introduced myself. I work for Galliford Try. I'm the BIM and digital delivery lead there. And I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, and my background specifically relates to this presentation, because as soon as I joined this industry, I was involved in something called the Avanti project, which contributed to the development of BS 1192-2007. So now, over 10 years later, we're still talking about the contents that came from BS 1192-2007, like the naming convention and a lot of the other small elements that made its way into the National Annex. I'd like to point out that the current contents of the National Annex are simply the current stage of the evolution of the information standards. The contents of our current National Annex originated from BS 1192-2007, evolved into PAS 1192 Part 2, 2013, which introduced changes of their own, like new status codes and volumes. They were then consolidated into the updated BS 1192-2007 Addendum 2, which then introduced a few more little changes and then went into the National Annex of our local ISO 9650 standard. So at each stage there were changes, like the ones in the National Annex being proposed as an update today. Changes to naming field, status codes, etc. So this new update is the next evolutionary step, hopefully in the direction of improvement, which is what this greater debate is about and what we're trying to establish. So as you know, the UK National Annex as part of 9650 has been updated and issued for comment by British Standards Institute. I was part of that group that did contribute to this update, but I must make it clear I'm not the author of all the suggested changes, albeit I do. I am a somebody who wants those changes a lot of those changes to be put forward, but I'm not the author of them, so don't shoot the messenger. But I do have a good understanding of why some of those changes were brought to the table. When the update was released, I did feel it was very important to explain these changes further, so I did propose write an article on LinkedIn on this that goes into a lot of detail about what those changes are, the reason for the changes, but also my opinion of how it could impact you, the industry. So I wrote this article because on face value, it seems that we're just trying to fix something that's not broke, and that isn't the case. Nobody likes change, and when it happens, we often as human beings go on the defensive, and to mitigate the impact, if we don't fully understand its change, we're not always constructive. So this is why I'm here today and why I wrote the LinkedIn article. So please review it. It does have more information beyond what I'm going to present in this presentation. So like with any update to anything, a change is usually instigated by a perceived problem, and this is true of the National Annex update. But what I want to illustrate to you is that some of the changes, although they seem significant at face value, are actually very minor and only become a problem if you misinterpret its purpose or you think about how it could wider impact your projects in a way that's not really necessary. So I want to give a few examples here. So there's 6 key areas that the current National Annex has in terms of proposed changes. My articles show 7, but the 7th is so minor I'm not going to bother. So I'm just going to focus on the 6 changes at the moment. So string length. So there is a temptation in the industry to corrupt the purpose of the field ID applied to information containers like drawings. This example you see here is real, I fool you not. It's a string length for a field ID that is to be applied to files, as in the PDFs when it's in like a Windows-based system, but also on document management tools within a single field. And it is popular with a large public client. So they force a deviation that can sometimes result in a name exceeding 200 characters. something that doesn't work very well in Windows systems, especially if you've got a complex folder structure in there, so you can actually end corrupting the file as soon as you download it because it won't open. Regardless of how poorly this idea was thought out, and the fact that this field ID example that you see on the screen has now got its revision in there, it's got LOD in there, and both of those values change in this field ID as each new revision comes out, meaning that you can't just load one on top of another in most document management systems. We wanted to try and push for the avoidance of this because it seems to be growing. I've come into 2 more examples in the water industry alone. So the proposed solution is to try and further emphasize the need to keep the field ID as short as possible. And the field ID is typically what makes its way into the file naming when files are downloaded from document management systems that make up the CDE solutions. I think the impact of this change is relatively low in terms of trying to keep the naming convention to a minimum, unless you typically do deviate and you do put a lot of information within that single field ID. Now, we are talking about the field ID that is specifically in the National Annex and how it pushes down into files. Obviously, as you download files onto your computers, you can take the field ID, which is the single string length, and if you want to put all other information in there, like the title of documents, you can do. But this is typically when you're principally sharing information within common data environment solutions that the entire team may have access to. So the second area that has been proposed for changing in the current National Annex as part of the one up for comment is the term volumes. So the term volume was poorly understood anyway before PAS 1192 Part 2 was withdrawn. And now that Part 2 has been withdrawn and 9650 has come out, it doesn't exist. There's no definition of it. So people entering the industry for the first time, and they see in the current National Annex this term volume, there's no context. There's nothing in there that applies a definition. And then 19650, it's all about the federation strategy and around information container breakdown structures. So the term volume was an issue. So the solution was relatively simple: remove all instances of volume, but leave system where it is. So using the old PAS 1192 Part 2 definition of a volume, where it kind of illustrated, I think it had a tunnel. It also illustrated some ductwork as a volume. It will only be referred to as a system, which is naturally a physical volume existing in a spatial volume. So the understanding of this field remains the same. I don't personally see much impact here beyond changes in the terminology within your plans and guides from volumes to systems, or potentially to information containers if you do use the 19650 approach, which is used as part of the comparable terminology in the federation strategy. But these terms should be updated anyway to reflect the new ISO standard and not the old PAS 1192. So I think it is primarily, it's going to be your project plans and your guidance documents maybe within your organization that needs change. I personally don't see any impact beyond that. Obviously, if you've got your own specific internal definition of a system and it's not comparable to this, that could also be another side impact. But yes, that's the proposed change. The third change in the National Annex is around levels. So the National Annex is accused of still being very building focused, and although levels are used in infrastructure, it's not typically how they arrange their information. So to misunderstandings, people try to force projects like rail projects to identify levels on each of their information containers / drawings, even though it has little value when they're trying to identify information. So somebody will come along and say, no, all your drawings, your schedules, specifications, they all have to have a level in it. No, they don't. So the solution was essentially a strike through of level location and come up with a spatial designation. So in simple terms, level locations, which are by definition a spatial label, were replaced with the word spatial to illustrate that levels should not be the primary focus. I would suggest, however, if you get a chance to comment on the National Annex, and I'm hoping that all of you that are taking part today will comment on the National Annex, to provide more examples of non-level based standard codes, because as you can see there in the update, this is still keeping the current codes. So I've put proposals forward, but I recommend you do the same so that somebody from an infrastructure side can understand more non-level location-based spatial reasoning within their information containers. Type codes. So this is one of the bigger changes in the current National Annex being proposed. The current list of type codes are a mix of form and content. And there has been long debates on projects where projects struggle to assign the right kind of code because they are unsure if they should be representing the form or the contents using this field, because both exist in the current list within the National Annex. So for example, in this example you see here, is the type of the contents of an information container the form, which is the schedule, or is it what's actually within the document, which is the schedule of accommodation? So both are schedules, but one of them kind of goes deeper into the contents and actually tells you what the contents are, which is around about the understanding of rooms, part of the accommodation breakdown. So the question is, do you want to simply know the form or understand the contents? And is the contents already defined perhaps in the system field, or perhaps in the general title, or even the classification? I don't have an answer for this, but it is something that seems to cause a lot of issues in projects. So I believe this could have a big impact, especially if you're one of the people that have extended the type list into the near hundreds. So on some projects, I've seen project BIM execution plans that have almost 100 type codes. And you look at it and you go, actually, with the particular document I'm uploading, it can fall into about 6 or 7 of them. So there is an issue there. So what the proposed solution is to focus on the type rather than going into the contents. End of the day, the new update still allows you to expand this list. So if you're used to adding to this and creating 80 type codes within a project list, you can still do that on a project, but beware that the new update is trying to focus on the form instead of the contents. So on the schedule, not the schedule of accommodation. Role codes. So this is another big change in my opinion. Updates to the role codes. We're down to the original problem where codes were being inconsistently applied. So as you can see the example there, if I'm a facade contractor who is essentially doing a specialist design, do I assign a subcontractor or do I assign a specialist designer? Those two codes above are the most common that happen on projects, and when they don't get a clear answer, they simply divert to Z for general. So we have this inconsistency applied onto a lot of projects. I did a review a couple of years ago to see how it was being applied onto a lot of our projects, and it was terrible. We had one organization with the same organization code typically, or it did change on some projects, but the codes that they used varied a lot. So they were doing the same packages of works, but the codes that they applied was different. So it did make it more difficult to filter down past work that they were doing. The fact is, most of the codes in the role table actually conflict with subcontractor and specialist designer because they are role descriptions that often have subdisciplines. So a mechanical engineer is both a subcontractor and a specialist designer, as well as a mechanical engineer. But a mechanical engineer is a discipline, the other two are just high-level roles. So it was something that we wanted to try and approach as part of the National Annex update. So the solution was to stop mixing the high-level roles and the specific disciplines, because an organization could be both a role and a discipline and only focus on the discipline. There are a few impacts here, so I recommend this one takes the most thought. I don't have time to run through all of my thoughts on this. I only urge you think about it in respect that we can't have both roles and disciplines mixing in here, and then return constructive feedback for how the current solution could be improved via the BSI website, or provide clear examples for the new solution and how it can be improved, because it is a proposal that's been put on the BSI website, and if you have an idea to how to improve it, put a lot of detail in there, because we don't want anything dismissed just because you've put a basic comment and that comment isn't understood correctly during the commenting phase. The last primary change in the National Annex update is status codes. So the status codes have been updated to reflect the changes in the ISO from the 1192 series of standards. A key change is to how the ISO makes it clear 2 tasks must be completed by information authors. Those 2 tasks being that they must seek authorization from the lead appointed party, and then if authorized, they must then seek acceptance from the appointing party. Now, we did write some guidance trying to use the current codes in the National Annex within the technical guidance documents you can find on the UK BIM Framework website. Now, we provided an example of how the current National Annex could be used in a process, and many of you, if you've seen that, it is a bit problematic, a bit clumsy, because we're trying to force fit old codes from the 1192 series to work with the steps, the processes that are defined in the ISO 9650, and it was clumsy. So what we're hoping is if these codes are refined or put forward and proposed going forward, that we can clean that up and actually get it to align with ISO 9650 more accurately. Now, remember, the purpose of the codes is to make it clear to the recipient what they can and can't do with the information. So if you want to make it clear that you're issuing information only for authorization only, but not for appointing party acceptance, so I don't want it to go to the client, Mr. Contractor, I just want you to check it and authorize it. Which code do you apply from the current National Annex? And there was a lot of debate on this. Nobody had the same opinion. Remember that there are a lot of tools out there that use autonomous digital workflows as well. So often triggered and dictated by the status code. So if somebody says, no, I'm just uploading it for information, which means there isn't an actual action to do, it might have a very basic digital workflow in the sense that it just says, just check to make sure the naming convention is correct and it's been uploaded on the into the right place on the document management system. It doesn't need to go off for anybody's approval or review or anything. But if you issue something for comment, there is a wider workflow. There's more to consider there. So a lot of organizations, including mine, use the status code as a trigger mechanism for a digital workflow. So it is important that we get these correct and that they're applied. So the solution was to have a clear code for both of the 2 principal steps within ISO 9650 Part 2. I've got mixed views on the impact of this typically on organizations, and the reason being is how the interpretation of the status codes vary in our industry. You may be surprised to know that the majority of our projects still use the original BS 1192-2007 codes, not the addendum, which starts putting in the A1, the A2, A3 and all that change in terminology, the original. So we still have projects that stamp something status A, send that to contractor, and status A means that's for construction. Doesn't mean it's stage complete, it means it's for construction. So if you've still got a lot of your projects using that, and I would recommend you do branch outside of the ones that you know as just the BIM projects, you probably find that a lot of your projects, your design managers, they're very familiar with the original BS 1192, which means that they are not even using the updated National Annex codes in its current form. So if your organization and most of your people are used to the original BS 1192-2007, the only impact will be learning to move from that withdrawn standard, regardless of whether you're using the older updated National Annex, because you've got to learn one of them at some point moving forward. If your organization has fully embraced the new codes, however, that came from Addendum 2 of 1192 or within the current National Annex, then yes, there is likely to be an impact. But remember that these codes can still be expanded upon. So if you feel a code has been removed through this proposed update, you can still add it back. It just might not have the same code. So if you had a specific code applied to S5, for example, you probably just have to move it like to S8, S9, whatever. That's just a tiny piece of metadata that's applied to the actual purpose, the suitability code, which is I issue for this reason. So that is it. That's the end of my presentation. If you've got any questions that are specifically on what I've noted, feel free to ask them. But what I don't want to do is go into any areas where, for example, you say, well, you know, what do you classify as a volume? That's something for the debate that's going to be going on in the various forums. So if you've got any questions just specifically to my presentation, feel free to propose them.
Well said. Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you very much indeed. We'll hold the questions until after the next presentation as well. And yeah, we're just going to switch back to my screen or we'll move on. Actually, no, don't need to do that. We'll hand over next. So next up is Ronald Lammerts van Buren. He's an associate and BIM lead at A Studio in London, and he's the founder of the BIM for Design Forum. He's got over 25 years of national and international architectural experience. And his area of special interest, as he says in his little bio, is overcoming the challenges BIM presents and working collaboratively with building teams to find the most effective solutions. I think that's something that has been really useful in the BIM for Design forum. And Ronald's going to take us through now their debate and their summary of what they found in the UK National Annex trying to implement it. Over to you, Ronald.
Great, thanks for that, Nigel. Good morning, all. I hope you can all see my my presentation. I take it you can. It's obviously on my screen. It's a little bit different from what you're seeing.
That's perfect.
But, okay, perfect. Okay, my name is Ronald Lammerts van Buren, like Nigel introduced. I originally established the BIM for Design Forum, and I'm also an associate at Studio Architecture. I'm responsible for the BIM development and implementation. This presentation will focus on who we are and what we do. And one of the projects that we've been working on as a building design group that relates back to this great British National Annex debate. First of all, I would like to just give a brief introduction on who we are as BIM for Design.
Sorry, we appear to have lost sound from Ronald at the moment. We'll just try and get him back online here a second.
Sorry, I might have flicked my little icon while I was moving the slide. Can you hear me now?
Perfect, thank you.
Yes, okay, sorry about that. Okay, we'll carry on. The group is made up of representatives, originally primarily from architectural design practices, who implemented, led and supported BIM and digital design tools. It was established as an impartial forum for members to exchange technical ideas and solutions relating to challenges BIM represented in the architectural design process from conception through to implementation. As BIM has become more ingrained in our design practices, the technology has evolved and our collective knowledge of BIM has expanded, and the forum has been able to widen its focus. The members now also include BIM professionals representing a range of sectors directly related to the design processes. So we've got architects, we've got landscape architects, we've got engineers, BIM consultancies, and design software developers. As you can see, the slide shows a range of companies that we represent by BIM for Design. Okay, the forum members share experience of all design softwares, BIM workflows, technical issues, and related technology providing impartial feedback and guidance on BIM design procedures. As a BIM for Design group, we are often at the forefront and the initiators of the BIM model, from design concept to construction. Our members would like to provide our experience and share our feedback on BIM procedure, workflows, and best practices with the UK BIM Alliance. One of the projects as BIM for Design Forum, we've been looking at how to apply the ISO 19650 file naming convention and how we actually use this in practice. The naming convention is being widely adopted by our members, and it provides a backbone for our models and our design documentation. BIM for Design would like to share with you our experiences of using this naming convention in our building design teams. The diagram above shows the file naming described in the ISO 19650 Annex. The string below is how most members of the group see the filing convention or use it. I'm going to give you a breakdown on each of those terms and how we apply this in the building teams. I'm just going to start off with the project code field. Most of this is described in the document as the project. As per note 2 in the guidance, which particularly on larger projects where we are faced or sub-projects, it allows you to divide the project as part of that code. So we may have the project recognition code plus any buildings that may be associated to that, or we just use that as if it's a small project. Depending on the size of the project, this depends whether we need to break it down. The originator field, obviously every member uses his own in this field, and it is clear who owns the drawing and who actually the drawing comes from. So we don't tend to include phase or element as part of the originator. The volume or system field. Most of our members use this field for zoning over volumes or systems. And now, if this is from an architectural point or a building point of view, generally the previous fields are static. The previous fields are static in this drawing set, and this will determine the order of the documents in Window Explorer. This is where the first sort of variation comes in. Levels and location fields. Now, the current list of predefined floor levels in the file system directory puts the basement and mezzanines out of order. The basement and mezzanine floors will, in the drawing order, sit at opposite ends from the above ground sequence or corresponding floor. There's a bit of an issue that we got is when we're putting these documents together, they just get out of order. The type field. This category has received a mixed reaction from some of the members, some using it to define the type of view for the drawings rather than using all drawings as obviously drawing renditions, and we're talking about actually drawing documentation here. This allows you to be able to identify drawing views from the naming convention. For example, we have sections, elevation, plan, and details. However, there are other members who prefer to keep this, to minimize this field and keep all the drawing documentation together as one group. The role field. Member use this field to describe this specific role. So I don't think we have too much feedback on that. This is where we get to the drawing number. Now, the numbering of the drawings is extremely important for the design team, in particular drawing order. I'm going to go into a bit more detail with this. Drawing order, because reading the files in the Window Explorer environment, the file naming sequence first displays volumes and then systems and then floor numbers before it actually gets to the actual drawing number. Until the main computer operating systems corporations can group parts of these file names, this will continue to be a problem. And this is not necessarily how we want a set of drawings to be read, because it's out of drawing number order. However, now we're going to focus on the actual sequence number of drawing number category. Drawing order is extremely important in a set of design drawings. It can be compared to reading a book. So you would not want to read the pages or chapters of the book in the wrong order. The same applies to a set of design drawings. I'm going to use the architecture drawings set as an example. The drawing set's normally broken down into categories. cover legends, drawing lists and site drawings, general arrangement drawings, detailed drawings and schedules. They all interact with each other through our callouts, and the drawing order is normally defined by the drawing number. All drawing numbers are unique. We don't tend to repeat numbers in set. As an example, we use this order to be able to communicate easily between teams and to select groups of drawings, for example, like tender packages. When construction commences, it's important that the drawings are in a particular order. An assumption can be made that the use of digital format hard copy drawings become obsolete, as we can use various software solutions to extract the design information as and when it's needed. However, in practical terms, hard copy drawings are still used on site, and until a full digital solution has been adopted, we still need to make sure that we can provide information that's easily accessible and in logical order. As we often communicate between site and offices, the use of the drawing number in isolation is a reference code to make sure that the different members of a building team are all looking at the same information. The drawing code gives us the opportunity to create order within our design team drawings. We did a case study when comparing the use of the number between the different practices. And we found that we used all similar methods of breaking down a different category. REBA recently carried out a survey which revealed that about 21% of companies use the CISFB coding, 15% use other coding standards such as Uniclass, the old and the new, and 64% made up their own coding numbers. I'm just going to give you now here some different examples and approaches using this drawing number coding. The two leading numbers of using the two leading numbers of the sequence. You can formulate these using an established code format, which can be represented by 2 or 3 number code. In these examples, the leading numbers shown are Uniclass 2015 or CISFB classification code. This may work for drawing series. However, regarding drawings such as general arrangements, project notes, it is debatable which category they would fall into. If you would follow these codes strictly, it would split your general arrangement drawings over several categories. If using this strategy, the old CISFB or Uniclass 1.4 coding is preferred, as Uniclass 2015 doesn't translate well into 2 or 3 characters. The second approach to leading numbers is by creating a list of number groups to be able to assign the drawings within the category. This can be based upon a hybrid of the old CISFB or Uniclass coding by adding groups that are not covered, such as the general arrangement of the notes. The third approach, to create a list of groups which suit your practice. And the fourth approach is to create a list of groups and then subgroups which suit your practice. These category numbers can form the 2 leading numbers of the sequence, and this would then be followed up by logical drawing sequence numbers. The advantages are that we can then control the way the drawings fall into the desired order when using document number code. I hope in this presentation that it has provided some evidence of the importance of the human readability of the whole string, and that we currently cannot rely solely on the metadata, which is not available when looking at documentation in isolation. The importance of drawing order in our documentation, as I show. I'm now going to hand over to Stephen Holmes, who's going to talk in more depth about the update discussions held at the group about the annex. Stephen?
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. Hopefully you can all hear me. So what I want to do is just talk through the sort of discussions and debates we've had over applying the standard onto our projects in real terms and looking at where we've had some challenges, where we've got consensus. So most of them are very comfortable with things like project and originator codes, type, yes, there was some discussion over best use of type, and certainly with the rest of it in terms of role, and then really, you know, how we use number, you know, there are good consistencies in terms of approach. But then we started looking at, you know, where we have those challenges. And the first one, yes, is about referencing drawings from one drawing to another, where you're cross-referencing. And, you know, if you've got 5,000 drawings on a project and they're all into cross-reference, keeping that short and concise can be really important in terms of clarity, ease of communication, and how we can actually cross-reference without obliterating our drawings with cross-reference numbers and making them hard to read. So that's been one of our first challenges, is what we do with that. How can we keep that concise? And if we extend it in terms of having to use additional fields, because traditionally almost all of us just cross-reference with the last sections, the role and the number, because it's a shorthand and it's a unique identifier. If we start expanding that into type, level, spatial and system, even originator, or even putting the full code in, what's the impact on our drawings? And that's a real challenge for us in terms of seeing where we can go with that and what the impact of that is in terms of how we communicate on our drawings and how we put the whole drawing set together. And if I can just have a look at the next slide. Thanks, Ronald. With that, so once we start looking at that, you know, we can move over from there. So Ronald, can you just move to the next slide for me? Thank you. So this was again about drawing sequencing and the impact of change across that for us if we start using the other fields and what the impact of it is for us. So drawing sequence becomes really important in terms of, as Ronald said, that storytelling and keeping it together in a coordinated and logical order for our drawings, and particularly outside of a common data environment where you're working in a file structure. So, and when you're putting drawings together, it becomes really practical to have them in a nice ordered functional set for you. And from that, it's, you know, the big conversation is about how we best use system and spatial. Traditionally, where we had volume and system, a lot of people were using that to reference the building on a multi-building project, for example. Level and location, how do we describe those? When it comes to models, that becomes much more important when we talk about volumetric models and looking at those, having whether this is a core model or a whole building model, a particular floor model, how you break down the building and complexity to aid design and also to aid construction, and who else is going to be using that model going forward. And the other challenges we've had is about, you know, best use of type and how we can keep things in sequence and order. So if we just go on to the next slide, this was then looking at, you know, how we make best use of system and spatial and what we really apply to it and use it for. And the biggest debate probably had was where we put the building reference, particularly on a multi-building project. Is it an extension of the project number where we just put an additional reference on the end of the project number to reference the sub-project or building? Do we put an additional field in for sub-project to uniquely each building? Do we then use system very much for the drawing series or the types of drawings or describing the content for it? And then we started looking at things like spatial location and particularly the whole issue over mezzanines and what happens when you've got a mezzanine on a 104-story building, you know, 110-story building. You know, where do you put that? If I have M on the front, it throws it out of sequence, and all of a sudden I've got those further down the sequence. And again, if we may have models for low and high services as separate models, we always ideally want to have adjacency of information, and spatial adjacency comes into play here. So could we consider moving the M, for example, as a suffix rather than a prefix, which would then reorder and resequence things, was another thing we looked at. So, you know, we've had lots of debates and lots of discussions over this. So thank you, Ronald, for the next slide. So that's the sorts of discussions we've been having. So for us, it's all about order and sequence, making sure we have that readable set of information and that it can be clearly and concisely referenced. So that's our importance for it, whether it's a model, whether it's a drawing, or the other myriad of documents that can form part of a project set of information. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Sorry, I completely forgot you were doing that presentation as well. So I'll make a public apology to the whole of the webinar now and say, Stephen Holmes, thank you for your fantastic presentation there, picking up some of the issues that have been raised at BIM for Design. If I can just get the presentation back, Pam. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So just before we go on to the next section, there are a number of questions that have been coming in. Some of them need to be taken up in the debate, but there are two that have been raised. Well, one's a comment really. The first one for John Ford, actually. You mentioned a lot of times the new fields, the way that volume system is now system, and the type codes, spatial codes. Is there any plan for the ISO 19650 guidance to include guidance on how those fields should be used and how they can be cross-related to things like Uniclass 2015 types and Uniclass 2015 systems? Is that going to go into the guidance document at all?
That's the intention, yes. So the intention was to actually start looking at it earlier, as in the current National Annex, but because we knew that we wanted to push forward changes, it's been held off. So that's why there's not any real detailed guidance about the naming convention. So once the proposal is signed off, because remember that the proposal at the moment that you see on the BSI website could change again when all the comments come in. Once that proposal is put forward, it's then, as part of the guidance, is to see how we can actually illustrate it being done in practice, and that's what we want to ensure.
Excellent, thank you ever so much for that clear and concise answer. And then one just, which is a question more for Stephen and Ronald, is BIM for Design. How is the membership sorted on that? Can you become a member? Is it specifically just for architectural designers, or is it wider? Is it for designing for fabrication and coordination within the project as well?
Well, I can answer that one. I mean, it's been a by invitation up till now group, because we wanted to keep it small to keep the debate going. It includes a cross-reference of architecture, structural, MEP, engineering firms, obviously all focused very much on design, but we are widening it out to a broader audience now. We wanted to keep it to a manageable size, so it was very much a discussion group rather than a much large group where it becomes much more presentational. But we are open for invitation. If people would like to get involved with us, we're more than happy to do so. And yeah, we do include it, and we certainly have plans to actually increase it so we have a broader audience in getting involved in the debate and the discussion and the real practical applications of the standards into our day-to-day jobs.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for clarifying that, Stephen. That's fantastic. So this next bit might get a little bit confusing. Hopefully, you should have all had emails concerning the various debate breakout streams that are now going on. What's going to happen, we're all going to leave this go-to meeting and join the various debate groups that you have been assigned. I'll take you through the breakout groups and names just so in case you've forgotten which group you're in a moment, and I'll introduce you to your hosts. But just remember, as we're going to the debate section, we want open and honest, but always respectful debate. Try not to talk over everybody else. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking to keep the background noise levels down. I think some of the hosts are handling things slightly differently. Some people are going to keep people on mute until they ask a question. Some people are going to leave it open. If you're in one of the debate streams that are leaving it open, please mute your microphone and be respectful of other people talking. Wait for them to have their say. The host should give you plenty of time to make sure that you can put your opinions across as well, and they will be trying to draw answers out of people who aren't necessarily vocal as well. There are no wrong answers in the debate. There are no wrong issues to be raised, although we're limiting it to the UK National Annex, so we don't want things about ISO 19650 itself. We're trying to identify areas of widespread challenge, but all the items that are raised will be noted down. They're going to be sent back, and sent on to the relative parties, who I'll explain at the end of the summary. So even if it's only you, that single voice shouting from the hilltop into Frustration Valley, we will get your points across and we will send them back to the team for comment and follow-up. But before we go on, just a quick kind of wording overview. As you're going through the National Annex, it's worth just a quick insight into the way that the verb forms are actually used within British Standards terminology. If you see a shall, it is a requirement. If you see should, it is a recommendation. In an ideal world, it would be you will follow, you should follow this unless there's a specific reason not to. May, can, might, they're all there. They're all possibilities. May is permission, can and might possibilities. So there are options, if you will. I don't want to get into any more detail than that. I'm not a specialist in this kind of thing, but the important difference is the difference between shall and should if you come across those in the National Annex. So very briefly, before we break off, if you see your name on these slides, have a quick look. I'll keep one up. You will be joining Duncan. You should have had an invite to his meeting. Make sure you join him. We'll all be coming back into this main session later. If you can't remember or you don't have a link to the various independent streams, some of us will be staying on this main go-to meeting. And if you have a problem, you can raise your hand or put a question up, say, I've forgotten where my link is. We'll get them together. We'll email them out to you straight away. The second building group is being chaired by Andy Bootle of Kier. And if you see your name on there, you should be joining him. Building group 3, chaired by Daniel Hesselwood. If your name is on there, you will be joining his Teams meeting. You should have had an invite to that already. For the civils and infrastructure consultants out there, you'll be joining Mike Turpin. He's also got a Teams meeting together. If your name is now on this list, that's who you'll be joining between 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock. For main and subcontractors, Jason Whittle will be your host. And if your name is on this list, that's where you will be. The silence is so you can read it, by the way, and you'll just not lost my place. Finally, we have the client asset management and FM group. That will be chaired by Hadil Sadoun. And the people joining that are listed on this screen here. Now, just before we move on, we leave this meeting and go to those various work streams. Don't forget, the debate is set from 11 o'clock until 12 o'clock. There is then a scheduled break between 12 and 12:15 for those hosts to get all the comments together and put things together for a feedback summary to the rest of us at 12:15. At 12:15, make sure you've rejoined the main go-to meeting, the one we're on now, the invite you would have had through already for this, so that you can hear the feedback, you can hear the summary of what's going to happen next to all your comments. So at this point, we'll leave this main stream. Please sign off and go and join your various breakout streams. As I said, Pam and myself at least will be staying on this meeting if you can't find the link or you've forgotten which group you're in because you couldn't read the slides quick enough, and we'll help you out. Thank you very much. See you on the other side about 12:15.